Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this relatively short notice media briefing. We are looking today at what the third option means for gender in South African IDs. Um, as some of you may know, the Department of Home Affairs in December last year gazetted a proposed amendment or proposed adoption of a new ID management policy. And so today we are going to be talking a little bit about that from the perspective of activists, academics, legal experts, and home affairs. I'm going to start unsharing my screen so that you can all see my face. I'm going to briefly introduce our partners here today and give each of them a chance to speak a little bit about this issue from their own perspective. And after that, I'm going to open up the floor to anyone who wants to ask them questions. I would like to first introduce myself. My name is Kellen Guetta. I am a trans activist at Iranti. I specialize in media and communications. And my colleague who is with me today is Sibusiso Keswa. Sibusiso uses he, him, and his pronouns and is a trans specialist at Iranti. He has been advocating for LGBTI human rights for the past 2 decades, having worked in many organizations and communities over that time. Also joining us is Crystal Hendricks. Crystal uses she, her, and hers pronouns and is currently involved in various intersex-related activities in South Africa. She serves as the chairperson of Intersex South Africa, an organization advocating for the rights of intersex persons. Crystal is also an advisory board member for the Intersex Human Rights Fund. She believes it is essential for voices of intersex people to be heard and works to ensure that intersex people themselves are centered in conversations and discussions on issues that have a direct impact on their lived experiences. B. Kaminga is a postdoctoral fellow at the African Center for Migration and Society, ACMS, from Wits University, South Africa. B uses they, them, and theirs pronouns and works broadly on issues relating to gender identity and expression on the African continent. Their first monograph, Transgender Refugees and the Imagined South Africa, published by Palgrave in 2019, received the 2019 Sylvia Rivera Award in Transgender Studies along with Aaron Azwira. They are also the co-convener of the LGBTQI plus Migration Research Network, ALMN. They are currently working on a new collection addressing African LGBTQI plus migration, queer and trans African mobilities, migration, diaspora, and asylum, due to be published by Bloomsbury's Z Books subsidiary in 2022. Mandy Mudarikwa is an attorney at the Women's Legal Center, WLCE, an African Feminist Law Center. The center uses strategic impact litigation as a tool for justice, equality, and inclusion for women in all their diverse identities. Mandy uses she, her, and hers pronouns, and her work includes undertaking a number of strategic cases and legal advocacy to promote equality, recognition, and inclusion, end violence and discrimination against all women with diverse sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions, and sex characteristics. And finally, I would like to introduce you to our representatives from Home Affairs, Chief Director Sihle Mtiani and Deputy Director Thomas Sigama, who at the time that I started had not yet made it to this meeting. I do want to note that Mr. Sigama is probably quite tired of Iranti, always contacting him for issues relating to gender identity and home affairs and legal gender recognition. So perhaps he's just sick of us. But with that, I do want to hand over to our esteemed representatives from Home Affairs and extend my deepest thanks that they've made the time to come through to us to tell us a little bit about the background of this Home Affairs proposed policy. So over over to Sikli Mtiani if you are there, if you can hear us.
Great, thank you very much and good afternoon. It feels good to be in this engagement again. We seem to be meeting quite often. Hopefully, we won't disappoint. By the time we are done with the policy, it would have really addressed the pertinent issues that this community has raised. Just for the benefit of those who are engaging with us for the first time, maybe let me first indicate that DDG Sigama is unable to join us, but equally we have been able to invite Dr. Aaron Ramudumo, who is well aware with this subject. In fact, it falls within his area. So we are well represented. I've also brought some colleagues from the policy unit, Mutieri Mufukeng and Sianda Mbanzi, who will be part of the discussion. Maybe just as a way of providing background so that as we engage, it's clear to everyone who's joining this meeting, what exactly are we trying to do? We're trying to put in place a policy that first and foremost is aligned with the Constitution. And there could be more principles that we are looking at, as you will know, colleagues, but there are two sections of the Constitution that are fundamental that we are looking at as we are introducing this new policy. The first one is Section 9 of the Constitution, of which members of this community, I think they are quite familiar with that section, when we speak about non-discrimination on the basis of sex, gender, it's mentioned race and language and all those things. And then the states cannot put in place a legislation that does that. Section number 10, which is also very important, deals with the issues of human dignity and issues of identity. They go right into the issues of human dignity. Like people want to be identified the way they are, not the way the state thinks. So that is pretty much the background. If you may allow me, I don't want to present the whole policy because it doesn't look like there are key issues that are being raised on other areas. I just want to focus on the issue of the composition of the identity number. Then after that, I'll just share a document where we discuss various options that we think may begin to deal with the issues that have been raised by the LGBTIQ plus community. So if you will allow me, I don't know if I'm able to share my screen.
You should be able to. I've got that in the settings.
All right, let's see.
Yes, that is visible to me.
All right, great. I hope it's visible to, let me put it on the slideshow. Is it on the slideshow that side?
Yes, it is.
All right, so let's start with the issue of the ID number. We have 13 digits. The first 6 digits that are dealing with your date of birth. Basically, first and second digit is the year, third and fourth is the month of birth, fifth and sixth is the date in which you were born. So this ID is for a person who was born in 1944, August 15. Then the 7th digit is a gender marker, basically. And this is where the challenge is with the current identity number. 0 to 4 represent the gender, which is females. And then 5 to 9 represent gender that is now males. And you can see it's binary. So if you are non-binary or transgender, or maybe let me not use transgender, let me use intersex, you are not catered for in the case of this ID number. So that is the issue of contestation, and it's the issue that we have been engaging with already last year. We have an engagement of this nature, which was led by the minister with the non-binary community. And this issue was discussed in advance. The other numbers, they are important, but not for purpose of today. So I will stop with digit number 7, which is the issue of concern for not only for this community, but also for us, because the point that we make on the policy document is that we need to be as constitutional as possible. So there is no room of saying other people cannot be identified as they are, not as we wish, as like I'm speaking on this case as a state. So I thought it was important that I speak to this issue, because this is when the issue of the third gender option comes up. Now, if you may allow me, I want to share another. I don't know, before I share the document in terms of the proposal, if Chairperson, if there is any question around what I've just presented.
No, nothing yet. I think we're going to open up a little bit later on for questions, unless you are pressed for time and need to step out, then please let us know, and then we can make a moment for questions. But other than that, we're going to go after everyone has presented.
Okay, great. Now let me share, and then so I've on the document that was gazetted, there is a section, it starts on page, tell you now, it's 7.3 paragraph on page 38. So this is where the issue about identity is discussed. And I'm happy I've seen your submission as well. Like it came in today. Like there's quite a few of submissions that have been received. So I don't want to spend more time in terms of the background. I want to go straight to what then is being presented. So what we are saying is the following observations and policy options apply under this section. The department must intensify its strategy of implementing phasing out of barcoded ID books. The department must intensify its strategy, its implementation strategy for modernizing all its offices. Once identity data has been collected through the registration process, it must be proved to determine its veracity. The identity proofing process is fundamental to ensuring accurate and trustworthy identities for identity proofing registration. These are the following, but I just want to go to Roman figure 4, which deals with the structure of an ID number. Saying the structure for an ID number, including its formats and length, require careful consideration of country context and privacy concerns. Policy options guiding the numbers, the number structures to be used could include the following. So this is when now we are making we are making recommendations in terms of how can you solve. Remember, I showed you digit number 7, which is a gender marker. Now, in order to make sure that that problem is solved, there are 3 options. Option number 1, it's a random number that is generated using mathematical algorithm and containing containing no information about the person. In this option, it does not mean information about the person is not kept on the National Population Register. Those details are kept there safe, and participants, you will know that there's a new system that we want to introduce, the National Identity System, which in terms of the standard that is set, it will be as secure as possible. So that is option number 1. Option number 2, a serial number assigned based on the order of entry into the system, with the highest number assigned to the most recent enrollee. It's close to option 1, but it's not based on any algorithm. Option number 3, which is the option that we've tended to put on the presentation, but stakeholders will know that I said in the meeting last time, you shouldn't really focus on the presentation, you should focus on the actual document that has gone out for public consultation, because we will be responding to stakeholders' input on the basis of what was on the document. So option number 3 then says a coded number that contains information about the person with certain digit coded sorry, colleagues. You know, when you're working from home, there are people who are calling you. So I'm trying to chase one before he disturbs with the meeting. Sorry about that. So this option, it's basically the only difference is you keep the same structure of the ID number, but when it comes to digit number 7, that is where we say you must then, the gender marker must accommodate male, female, intersex, and etc. And we argue further on this document. In the interest of time, I wouldn't go through because I know that you have read. So what we've said, if you look at this, let me read this paragraph about the 7 digits. We're saying the 7 digits of the ID number is a gender marker that indicates whether the ID holder. Now I've said that. What I wanted to say is to accommodate non-binary, transgender, intersex person, it is recommended that an alternative digit or letter X be used for the population, the non-binary population, or the intersex population. Thus, this will be a subject of further consultation with the affected population. So I think that is very important for us, because what we've put here is initial thinking around the gender marker, and Sibusiso and other members have been part of engagement. We are wiser now. In fact, you can see on the paragraph that is highlighted in red, previously it used to talk about sex, but we've learned we are improving the document as we're going along, that we actually talking about gender issues here. So Chairperson, let me stop here. But basically we're proposing there are 3 options basically. It's either you go for a serial number, you go for a number that is generated using a mathematical algorithm, or you go with the 3rd option, which is the current number, but only focus on making sure that you the gender marker is it accommodates everyone equally. There's no one who feels superior than the other. Let me stop there, Chairperson. Thank you so much. Before I hand over to you, maybe if you don't mind, can I request Dr. Ramudumo to make inputs before we then, we're here to engage with the stakeholders. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. And yes, I'm perfectly happy to hand over to Dr. Ramudumo. Would you like to take the floor, Doctor?
No, thanks. Not at the moment, unless there are questions at a later stage. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. And Mr. Mtiani, can you unshare your screen if that is okay? And then we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we are going to now move to, sorry about that, just something in my settings. So we are now going to move on to B. Kaminga, who, as I've introduced earlier, is an academic who has worked quite extensively on issues as they relate to gender identity in the context of our society, not just in South Africa, but broadly within our region as well. B, would you like to speak briefly on, I suppose, the work that you've done ahead of this proposal being gazetted and what it means broadly for gender diverse, trans and intersex people in South Africa?
Sure, thanks, Kellen. I just want to start off by thanking the department for this draft policy. It speaks to a lot of the concerns that we have raised over the last, I think, 3 to 5 years and longer in terms of the problems with the current Sex Description Act. Obviously, there are a couple of bumps in the road and issues that we as a community have continued to raise, and I think will continue to raise, and I imagine that some of my colleagues will speak to that. More broadly, we've seen that since the implementation of the Sex Description and Sex Status Acts in 2003, that is a model of legal gender recognition that is based on medicalization and is incompatible with South Africa's priority to achieving social equity. We've seen global shifts over the last 18 years where trans people and intersex and non-binary people have increasingly been able to self-determine and self-actualize their gender identities and make those known to the state. So we have examples from Malta, Spain, Nepal, Colombia, Uruguay. And these all show a kind of commitment to human rights and dignity and freedom and the equality of trans and intersex and non-binary people. Now, to make it clear, in South Africa, some trans people do have access to legal gender recognition through the Sex Description Act, which means some people are actually male or female, and those are recognized on their documents. And so many of us don't feel complete support for I think the section that was outlined in yellow, because many trans and intersex people in South Africa are not X. They are not an unspecified option. They are actually men or women and enjoy those privileges currently. The suggestions of the policy are really forward-looking and fundamental in bringing people like myself into a model of legal gender recognition, allowing people like myself the option to have documents which recognize who I am at present and have a relationship with the state that isn't one that is consistently one of inaccuracy, confusion, and inconsistency. What many of us are looking for is ultimately a system that is simply a simple administrative procedure that allows adults and capable minors to choose between M, F, or X unspecified, and this would be coupled with randomized ID numbers, because at present, when a person transitions and makes that known to the state, they are given a new ID number, because as before, the ID number indicated they're a woman, it now indicates that they are a man, and this creates a number of bureaucratic issues, including the doubling up of numbers. It also means that not all systems allow an individual to align with how they present. So we see statistically that trans and intersex people are less likely to be able to access the labor market. They're less likely to gain adequate employment. They're more likely to be accused of fraud and find themselves in quite difficult legal situations. It also leads obviously to financial issues. We saw that, I think it was 2 years ago now, with the women who went on hunger strike to have her documents changed. So we've seen over the history of the Sex Description Act in South Africa that it has created a situation in which inconsistencies have led to greater inaccuracy and have made the system far more difficult to access than easier. And research shows that the harder a system is to access for trans, non-binary, and intersex people, and the higher the levels of bureaucracy that are required, the more likely it is that people are going to be walking around with documents that don't match who they are. And this actually makes fraud more widely possible in any given community. In countries such as Belgium, Denmark, Malta, Norway, Argentina, where people have been allowed access to self-determination, we've seen less bureaucracy has made a massive impact on people's ability to survive and has also brought down the cost of legal recognition. So in closing, I'm really very supportive of this draft policy, but I do think that we should have ID documents that enable all individuals in South Africa to have their legal gender recognized, is based on self-determination, and includes the option of X, but this should be an option that is one that is opted into rather than forced onto anyone, and X should indicate unspecified, and that we should have randomized ID numbers. And lastly, that the M or F, which now appears on our smart cards, should be removed from the smart cards as well. We didn't have a gender marker on the green ID books, and the phasing out of the green ID book has been difficult to attain with the trans and non-binary and intersex community because many people have held onto them given the fact that they don't indicate M or F. Thank you.
Thank you very much, B. That last note on the green ID books is quite valuable. For me personally, I still have my old green ID book because until such time as I am able to change from M to F, it's not something that I want seen on my documentation. With that, we're going to move on to Mandy from the Women's Legal Center to touch a little bit on the legal aspects of this, as well as some of the work done around this by the Women's Legal Center. I think it perhaps goes without saying that allowing for a third option when it comes to gender markers is going to have an impact on things such as the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act, such as Act 49, the act that stipulates how one accesses legal gender recognition. And so I feel that we will be having conversations around affected legislation for many months to come. But Mandy, I don't know if you want to touch briefly on that. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you so much for having me here. And also thank you to Home Affairs for your presentation. I think it was useful to understand further the thinking around the policy. So I'm from the Women's Legal Center. We offer free legal assistance to women. And so we've been doing work offering legal assistance to clients that have come seeking legal gender recognition, and we've assisted through legal representation, letter writing, and also litigation. So essentially the issue of identity here, when we're coming to the legal perspective, it's going to sort of, it's an interlinkage of three laws, which is the Identification Act, the Birth and Death Registration Act, the Alteration of Sex Description Act, and also to an extent the Marriages Act. But our courts have emphasized that the legal gender recognition is not really impacted by someone's marital status, but it is still a problem in the implementation currently of Act 49. I'm going to just refer to Act 49 as the shorter name for the Alteration of Sex Description Act. And also, you can hear my baby in the background. Also working from home. That's also just the reality of working from home. So essentially, the first starting point is the population register. The Identification Act's mandate the Department of Home Affairs, specifically the Director General, to compile and maintain a population register. And this population register is essentially maintained and recorded through the Birth Registration Act, as well as the Marriages Act. And so there are steps when a person is essentially born up to when a person dies that are compiled into the population register. And one of those things that the population register requires is it mentions a number of things. It requires 9 things, and it requires about 15 things, but one of the things that is required is the gender of the person related. And in this act, it actually does not say what are the options, it just says the gender of the person, but you will notice that the act itself talks about he or she. When you then come to the regulations of the Identification Act, that's when Mr. Mtiani has already explained what each of those numbers mean. But you will notice that in Regulation 3 is when you essentially then get the option of saying that this number can only be 0 to 4 if it's male, and this number can be 0 to 4 if it's female, and 5 to 9 if it's male. So that's when you really see this binary system is really built into the legislation itself. And even when you come to the Birth and Death Registration Act, you will notice that the forms required also. So when a person is born, there's a process that has to be followed leading up to the point when an ID is given. And all of that, again, is also built into a legal framework of laws. So when a person is born, there is a proof of birth form that must be given, whether you're born at home or born in a hospital, wherever the context is, there's a process that is followed for there to be confirmation that indeed a person was born. And in the DHA 24 that is given at the hospital, it also requires, it then changes the language to the sex of the child is then required. And then also when you then start talking about birth registration, there is also a form that must be completed, which is B154. And that form must also attach the proof of birth. Again, in this process, this also talks about sex of the child must also be given. And then currently, when a person then turns 16, that person is also allowed to apply for an identification document on condition that their details have already been captured in the population register. So if their details were not captured in the population register, they would have to start with that whole process again of birth registration to then enable them to apply for an identification document. Again, as already you've mentioned, Kellyanne, that the gender marker is also included in this process. And right now, if you're applying for a smart ID, it would then be included specifically in the smart ID. But if for people who still have the green barcoded ID, that would also not be there. But there will still be a gender marker in the identification number because that identification number is included in both forms of the ID. Again, at marriage, the sex of the parties is also required, whether it's a same-sex marriage in terms of the civil unions or customary marriage, or whether it is a civil marriage within the Marriages Act. And also at the point of death, sex is captured as well. I didn't actually check the Birth and Death Registration Act to see what the language it uses for death, whether it talks about sex or gender. But there is this almost, and it starts off with gender, but then it moves on to talk about sex in some of the laws. So that's also language that would have to also be dealt with. And also the Alteration of Sex Description Act, to the extent that it offers an avenue for people to be able to change the details that were captured at birth in the population register. It also follows that, it also follows the binary system, because it does not create a new legal framework. It just follows the existing legal framework set by the Identification Act and by the Birth and Death Registration Act. And then it only simply tries to give people options to amend and change the details that were captured in terms of these laws at birth. So to a very large extent, in fact, to all contexts, 849 pretty much reaffirms the sex binary options that are available for people who, when they register, when they are registered at birth. And was already explained, it's quite problematic for many communities, and for particularly two reasons. Firstly, in that it does not allow, so 849 in itself does not actually allow people to self-determine, in that it does not allow the expression of bodily autonomy where people are able to say, I am this person, this is who I am. It relies quite extensively on medical approaches where doctors have to confirm that this person is indeed, this is their gender identity. So that requires people to have access to health, and it requires people to have had some form of medical intervention. And even for intersex persons, it also requires there to have been someone who can, a medical person or a social or psychological person who has to write and explain that this person is indeed intersex, and and then explain a little bit about each person. So it, to that extent, is problematic. And then secondly, this issue that I've already spoken about, that it also confines itself to the two options. The female and female gender markers has already been explained. So essentially, these options are quite problematic for many people. In the work that we've done, we've seen that people are waiting long periods of time. The least amount we've seen is 3 months, and the longest that we've seen is 11 years, where people are waiting for 11 years just in this limbo, where they've got documents that don't meet their lived gender identity. And this is even compounded when it's now a marriage, especially a marriage in terms of the Marriages Act, where that Marriage Act, as you know, regulates heterosexual marriages. So essentially, when the marriage is recorded, they record male and female. So when a person then applies for a sex description, to alter their sex description, you then find that there's problems because the registers that are kept are separate. The registers for the Marriage Act is separate, the register for the Customary Marriage Act is separate, and the register that is kept for civil unions is separate. So the register for customary marriages, for civil marriages right now, requires male and female to be captured. And so when a person then applies to alter the sex description, it's becoming problematic for Home Affairs to process this, because then now it's either female and female or male and female, which then has become a problem. This has been litigated. Our courts have explained that marital status is not a consideration for legal gender recognition. But at a practical point, it's still a problem, because you then are having people being told they must either be divorced, or you have Home Affairs deleting their marriages in order to be able to give effect to the legal gender recognition applied. So it's quite complicated. So that's essentially the framework that also needs to be amended as the policy is developing. The policy is indeed aware of these legal framework and has mentioned some of these. So hopefully this is a dialogue that also continues to happen as the engagements of the policy happen. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop there for the sake of time. I'll stop there and hand over back to you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. That was wonderful. And I was actually going to bring up the cost judgment as a follow-up question, but you preceded me and you did touch on the fact that actually moving forward, issues around gender and marriage hopefully will not be an issue, as it's already been litigated. I would like to move on now to Crystal Hendricks from Intersex South Africa. I think a lot of the conversations that have been had in public around Home Affairs, the ID management system, have been very focused on trans people. And we do, in fact, it's an issue all across the world, not give as much attention to intersex issues as is always needed. I personally think that the proposal by Home Affairs is very forward-thinking in mentioning intersex issues, in taking cognizance of intersex issues. But Crystal, I think you are much better placed to speak about this than I am. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy International Women's Day for those that are celebrating. Thank you so much for this conversation, and also thank you so much for Home Affairs for that presentation or that draft. So my name is Crystal Hendricks. I'm from an organization called Intersex South Africa. Just to give a bit of background regarding, basically, to give a background on intersex people. So as I wanted to say as most, but obviously a lot of people don't know. So intersex people are individuals born with any six variations, characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, 6 hormones or genitals that doesn't fit the typical binary notion of male and female. I think the intersex community in South Africa, currently that's working with Intersex South Africa is not that huge. Like there's not a lot of number of intersex intersex people in South Africa that we are working with. But I think it's more based on the discrimination that intersex people face, and just the complete erasure from the communities because of IGM, which is intersex genital mutilation, and also just the general discrimination that intersex people face. I think last year when the first article was published regarding the changes, and one of the headings was that South Africa will now be introducing a third gender. And I felt that was very triggering, especially when they was referred to intersex people. And society has already tried to erase intersex people by firstly saying we do not exist. Now we've come out and we say, hey, we are over here and we also need human rights and our lives matter as well. And now being linked to a third gender, I think it will just cause further isolation of intersex people, because being intersex obviously has nothing to do with your gender identity as a human. And just like B said regarding the changes to the new smart card and the ID, it's really been triggering for intersex people, because a lot of intersex people are struggling to have either the gender marker updated, but due to the lack of access to healthcare and the processes that you have to go through, which just are not available for intersex people, it does leave a lot of intersex people in a really difficult situation where they do not physically present as to what's labeled on the smart card. And I think a lot of us just decided not to go get the smart card and just remain with the green ID book, because that's just what feels safe. But I mean, when your human rights are being violated as a human, and you have to opt to not get a new updated ID because of safety issues, means that there's definitely an opportunity for change in the way systems are run based on societal norms. And I think it's very important that when we're looking at this draft and we're looking at implementing a genderless ID number or ID document, it's very important that people have self-determination and that autonomy where they can decide if I'm intersex, if I want to identify as male, if I want to identify as female, or I want to identify as non-binary, and then have the option of an X. But it shouldn't mean that, hey, you are born intersex, so therefore you are an X. Like it shouldn't be that shouldn't be the case, because it shouldn't be linked to that directly. Intersex people still need to be able to self-determine which gender marker they would like to have. And I think already out there now, when you read articles online, people are thinking, no, that the third gender, as it's being called. It's just there for intersex people or transgender people, and because people is not really understanding the complexities when it comes to sexual orientation, gender identity, and your expression as a human. And I think for intersex people in South Africa, it's always been difficult. It's still difficult. We've seen lots of different countries adopt new ways of doing things. So it's not so harmful for intersex people. Like we look at Malta, where they don't need to assign a certain gender at birth, and they give the intersex child an opportunity to self-determine at an age where they can. And already South Africa doesn't allow such opportunities for intersex people, and then in a later stage in life, it gets made more and more difficult, like Mandy said, to even get your gender marker updated or for things to change as an intersex person. So I think it's really important that we get the right messaging out there, especially when working with these topics, but also that we always remember that, you know, yes, that there's a lot of systems that we have to work with, but at the end of the day, we are still working with humans, and we need to ensure that we are not violating anyone by the messaging we're putting out there. And also when we are working with drafts and we kind of mention intersex people, we need to also let people understand that being intersex is not a gender identity. And I think that is so important. But again, yeah, I just want to say thank you. I was reading through that draft now, and it makes sense. And there's a lot of inclusion in there. But I think the main thing is, you know, for humans to self-determine what they want to identify, and it shouldn't be that you are intersex, so you need to be an X. It can be that I'm intersex, but I want to identify as male, I want to identify as female, or I want to identify as X. But at the end of the day, the choice should be with the human itself, and not the system forcing someone to choose a certain category to meet society's norms. And I think that's it for me, because I feel like Bea and Mandy already touched on a lot of stuff as well. So just for time, thank you so much again for this conversation, and also for including me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Crystal. I suppose perhaps I should add briefly just some context for those who are not aware. You mentioned IGM, intersex genital mutilation. As it currently stands, the majority of countries in the world, including South Africa, do not prohibit unnecessary surgeries on newborn children with ambiguous genitalia. The vast majority of intersex newborns, infants, are surgically made to conform to either male or female. With regard to Act 49, intersex people can amend their gender markers from M to F or from F to M as it currently stands, but they must provide medical evidence that they are intersex. However, there are many instances, Iranti has dealt with several instances, I'm sure Intersex South Africa has as well, where individual doctors make it very difficult to access medical records. So you may be the actual person on whom a doctor has done surgery, and you are now over 18 and you are requesting access to your medical records. Very often that is a difficult thing to do. And very often these surgeries do lead to other physiological complications down the road. So it's not simply a fact of identity. This is a fact about people's healthcare and actual physical well-being when we talk about amending the way that our laws and our society sees sex and gender. With that, our final speaker is my own colleague from Iranti, Sibusiso Keswa. Spu, would you like to take the floor?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I want to appreciate the presence of Home Affairs in the space, and I appreciate the media present, and I greet the colleagues. Okay, yeah, they've touched on many important things that we are raising as the sector. So I will try and highlight the things that colleagues have been raised. So for instance, Mr. Mtiane in his presentation said, you know, Home Affairs is doing its best to ensure that, you know, the promises of the Constitution are a reality to this community. And as a sector, we can feel that. We are convinced that that's what the department is trying to do. And I'm also happy to, you know, as Mr. Mtiane pointed out, that, you know, they are learning, hence, you know, they are making improvements on the document as we are going along. But you see, we, at this point in time, we cannot rely on the Constitution alone, because the Constitution itself does not unpack how this reality must look like. As a result, in the previous consultation, we directed Home Affairs to look at the Yogyakarta principles, especially Principle 3, because it details on how now the practical situation or the practical of the policy should look like. Because then, if we don't follow that guidance, I promise you that the policy will serve the minority of transgender people and the minority of transgender, intersex, and non-binary people. And that minority is the minority that already, you know, have some privilege of being in big cities, of having a social class, you know, that is better, and they can access all these kinds of things. Somebody who is in some, you know, rural area in Montfrere or Kuruman, wherever, will not be able to enjoy the promises of this policy that is on the table. And therefore, taking the guidance from the South Africa is already a signatory. So taking guidance from that document will ensure that even, you know, because you see, the problem is that people believe, or there is a notion that, you know, somebody who has, you know, undergone medical treatment or surgeries or all these kinds of things is more transgender than the other person who has not done anything to their bodies. And that is a fallacy. That is untrue. It's just that maybe for one reason or the other person has not, or is not yet at the point where they've decided. But the two are in actual fact the same. And therefore, the ideal situation should be able to accommodate both those people. The one who has made some means to align to their gender identity, and the other one who has not, because of reasons that are known to them, right? So I'm encouraging. Right, now I want to move to the paragraph that Mr. Mtiane has was discussing in his presentation about the 7 digits. This is the crux of the matter, because now the paragraph starts by, it's not paragraph, the line within the paragraph says to accommodate, and then it goes on and that, and it's talking about the possibility of an X. To Home Affairs, if the X is reserved for the transgender, intersex, and non-binary people, then it works against the very, very principle of the policy, because then it means you are putting those groups aside, you are outing them, you are othering them. So the proposal from us is that if you go that route of using the X or choosing a specific digit to accommodate trans, and then that digit or the X should be accessible to all South Africans. In that way, it means you have managed to mainstream the community to blend and to be part of everybody else. Or you shouldn't do it at all. Alternatively, then you should stick to the randomized numbers developed by the algorithm. And then when it comes to, say, for instance, like in a passport, there should be M, F, and then there, if you choose to have an X, then that X must mean unspecified, nothing else. And I'm very, very happy that in this conversation and in the presence of the media, the notion of third gender is discarded, because we do not want a third gender. There shouldn't be a third gender, because a third gender, it is those abnormal people, those people who are different, and therefore.
Okay, it seems that my colleague has fallen off this call. That is unfortunately the nature of these online meetings. We've already mentioned having people and children in the vicinity, and here is another reality of the world we find ourselves in. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I think my colleague has touched broadly on everything that we at Iranti are calling for. It aligns, I think, pretty closely with what B and Crystal and Mandy have been saying. We don't want a third gender. We want a third option. We want it to be available to anyone who would like to access it or who needs to access it for whatever reason. If you only reserve it for non-binary people or intersex people, then anybody who sees your ID number will immediately know that you are one of those people, and that could lead to violence, that could lead to discrimination. I think in closing, I must touch on this fact that South Africa remains an incredibly homophobic and transphobic society. And even though our laws are already some of the most progressive in the world, violence against our communities remains very high. So it is not enough to simply change legislation. We need to change hearts and minds as well. And that is why, esteemed media, you have been invited to this session. In recent weeks, this story around Home Affairs has really captured a lot of public discourse. But we want to make sure that not only is any reporting that goes forward in the coming week ahead of the final submission deadline to Home Affairs, but after that and in the years to come as debates around how specifically legislation needs to be amended happen, we want to make sure that you have the resources to provide an accurate and nuanced conception of what's going on to your readers, to your viewers, to your listeners. And with that, please do raise your hands if you have any questions for any of our guests. When I call on you, just, I suppose, introduce yourselves and the organization that you work for, and then you can pose your question. Sibusiso has just come back. He did send me a message while I was talking to indicate that his internet had died. Okay. Spoo, you have rejoined us, I see. I've just opened for questions. Do you want to make any closing remarks before we go on to questions?
At the end of the day, we will repeal Act 49 because it is outdated and its implementation is problematic. In the interim, between now and the day where there'll be a new law, we are relying on Act 49, and therefore we still appeal to Home Affairs to put the SOP in place. And my last point then is that, you know, if we do this right, and then we get the policy right, I believe then the new law will be easier to make, and it will ensure that the Constitution is a reality for the gender and sex minorities. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And for those who are not aware, the SOP is the standard operating procedure, which Iranti and several organizations have been asking Home Affairs to look into. As it currently stands, different Home Affairs officers tend to interpret the law quite differently, which does mean that certain trans, gender diverse, and intersex people are turned away when they have a legal right to amend their gender markers. So I now open the floor to questions. Please do raise your hand, and then I will call on you one by one. I suppose I will start. I want to pose a question to our colleagues from Home Affairs. This is perhaps a tricky question, so do feel free to answer in broad strokes if it is better. But I think you've heard throughout many of our presentations that the law as it stands will need to be adapted and amended in order for this proposed ID policy to be implemented. So clearly, the conversation does not end on the 15th of March. What are the next steps? Where will we go from here?
So without a doubt, the law is going to change. I think in the document we do indicate that the Identification Act and Act 49 will have to be amended in line with the new requirements, basically. So that is without a doubt. So maybe let me also try and respond to other issues that were raised earlier on. Really, the digit number 7, how we've addressed it, like I think we do say in the document that we are going to go for undertake further consultation for advice. I think we are much wiser now than we were when we started with the process. I think the issues that are being raised is, look, you are raising a very important point about discrimination. And we, as Boo is saying, we wouldn't want to go against like Section 9 of the Constitution, which you are saying we want to align with that. I think also we will make sure that I think the point that was made strongly earlier on before Spoo, I think it was Crystal, she can, I think, yes, the intersex community. I really hope you will also make a submission to that effect so that when we come out with a revised document, it really takes care of those issues. You see, there's this thing called or rather, let me put it this way. When you make a mistake while you are trying to make this situation better, and you also make it worse. So we don't want to make it worse, but you want this change, as Spoo was saying, is to implement the Constitution in the identity management system. Basically, that is what it's all about. And as you all know, it won't end with the new legislation. Also, there's lots of change management process that must happen after this, because you may change the law, but if attitude of people have not changed, it becomes a problem. The issue about the SOP, it's not a policy issue, but I think the point was clear. It's in the meantime, we need to get to the SOP in place. I think in the last meeting that we had with the community, we did report that we are working on the SOP and we'll be inviting experts to assist with that. And if it's not only the SOP, even the, what you call the training that is required for our officials. We've really committed to that. And the minister has gone public to say, yes, we definitely want to address those issues. In fact, you remember the joint statement that was issued, a media statement. It talks to those issues of SOP and Act 49, and also the current, I think the privacy issue during that meeting, that the requirements from Home Affairs, some of them they're not humane. So those are the things that definitely they will be changed on the legislation. In a nutshell, we take inputs that are being made, and before this becomes law, we will really come back and engage with the community, especially you are, when it comes to this change that you're discussing today, we are the mostly affected community. Personally, I don't see any problem with reserving acts for unspecified gender. I don't think that should be a problem. It's something that we need to take through the process. So any of those options that I've presented earlier on, the bottom line is there should be no outing and othering on the policy document. I will stop there for now, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Mtiani. And Crystal has added in the chat that Intersex South Africa will be making a submission to Home Affairs on this. Crystal has let me know that she needs to step out of this session at 15:15, which is in 3 minutes. So Crystal, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any closing words that you would like to give to our guests, please do. And after that, if there are any further questions, the floor is once again open.
Hi, thank you so much, Kellen, and thank you so much, everyone, for this meeting. And definitely, as I said, that Intersex South Africa will be making a submission. We are just finalizing it, and then we will be sending it through to Home Affairs. So, thank you so much, everyone, and have a good week further. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so the floor is once again open to questions. I love it. This means that we were all clear. We made perfect sense. Everyone is on board. I love it. I do want to add, since it is Women's Day today, that there is a lot of talk. I haven't seen it explicitly in South African spaces, but generally in countries like the United States and the UK, there is often talk that these diverse gender identities are erasing women, that including trans women into women's spaces erases women, that non-binary identities are destroying gender as we know it. So I think I should add at this point that we don't want that. We believe everyone should be able to self-identify in whichever gender they feel most comfortable, and that includes the category of woman. If someone has a gender marker identifying them as a woman on the IDs currently, they will not have to go back to Home Affairs and be forced into some kind of neutral option. It is something that we want everyone to be able to decide for themselves, not be forced into. With that said, I suppose if there are no questions, we can open the floor to our speakers if there's anything that they want to add. I suppose I should have mentioned to our speakers that if another speaker has said something that you would like to respond to or add on to, you're also more than welcome to do that.
Kellen?
Yes.
From our side, we want to recommit ourselves as an organization and as a sector that we are going to be working with Home Affairs hand in hand until the finish line, which is the new law, the new legislation. So we are here for a long haul. So thanks very much. Last thing, I want to appreciate the tone and spirit of Home Affairs officials in a sense that we don't feel, we feel we are taken seriously, even inviting them and they honor the meeting, and that shows commitment on their side. And throughout engagement, we feel, you know, we are not the inferiors in the conversation. So I want to say that publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Spoo. And I second that sentiment. I think with everything going on, it is good to know that we do have people in government who take us seriously, even where we perhaps disagree on certain elements. It's good to know that we can have these conversations. If anyone else would like to, I suppose, make closing comments, we are a little bit over 10 minutes, a little bit under 15 minutes away from closing. So I think let me put our speakers on the spot to make some closing comments, starting with Mandy.
I just also want to echo Bu's comments and just thank the Home Affairs also for coming and engaging, and especially just hearing what the asks are and what are some of the practical things that will really make rights, people experience rights and understand their own control of their bodies and how they can make that control a reality. So I also too want to echo that, and also thank you, Iranti, for hosting this and for inviting us. And I think that this is going to be, we are in for a long journey. So it is good that we are actually, we are already quite working well with all different stakeholders on the issue. So I think that it's going to make this very long journey comfortable and also effective, especially for the people that whose rights are impacted every day by the decisions that are going to be made in the policy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And B, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, yeah. Yeah, I'd like to echo everything everyone else has said. It's really amazing to be able to engage with a department like this and to have them come to the table and tell us what they're thinking. And of course, I think all of us understand, given the journeys we undergo as people, to understand our gender identities and the ways in which we move in the world. We're not expecting the department to get it right immediately, or anyone else for that matter. And of course, as it was said, there will be mistakes along the way, and I think that it's great to admit those things up front. And I think I've already put my submission in. So yeah, I look forward to seeing the changes and hopefully being able to get involved in that as well.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. And that leaves us with our esteemed guests from Home Affairs, Mr. Mtiani, Dr. Ramodumo. If you would like to make any brief closing comments before I say farewell to our guests and close us off, please do.
All right, no, thank you so much. Just one point, Mandy, you should be a lawyer, am I correct?
Yes, I am a lawyer.
Okay, thank you very much. I really enjoyed how you unpacked the issues around binary issues. Like it refreshes when we, especially like I think I'm right to say, to engage with the younger generation. Let me not say young people, the younger generation. Today I've been married like for 18 years, so you can tell my age, like quite advanced now. But what I wanted to say, just to whet your appetite, just watch the space in April. If things go according to plan, we will be publishing a marriage policy. Again, like the issues that you've mentioned here, we deal with those issues. The case that you are referring to, the transgender couple, we are addressing that issue also in this new policy. Issues around, again, Section 9 and Section 10. You can't change the policy without dealing with Section 9 and Section 10 of the Constitution. So the marriage policy really looks at that. It also, just to whet your appetite, broaden the scope in terms of who can be a marriage officer. You know, currently there are limitations in that space. We are broadening the scope there, and just be prepared. I think Busiso said we are in a long haul on this one. It's gonna be a long journey, but I think it's a journey that's for our generation. It's important that we take. It's an investment to the next generation. I will end here and hand over back to you, Chairperson. But thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you very much. And that is exciting as well, to know that potentially we'll be seeing some additional proposals coming out for us to debate and engage with in the coming months. So with that, if there are no other questions, I think we're going to close it off here. We're about at the end of the session. So I want to thank everybody who could make it. Also extend thanks to Thomas Igama, DDG of Home Affairs, who could not make it. And yes, I suppose just offer some parting words around how important these changes are. I think everyone has heard here from people who live and breathe these issues, that it is not simply a case of some frivolous desire to want to be cool and different and have something else on your ID. This is a situation that genuinely has real tangible impact on the mental health, on the physical health, on access to work and education and housing and grants and bank loans and all of that for countless trans, intersex, gender diverse people. So I do hope that moving forward, when the media reports on issues such as these, that this will be taken into account. I trust actually that all of you will provide kind of nuanced reporting on the matter. So far, as Iranti, we haven't seen any real negative or horrible reporting. And those of you who are present have been specifically invited because we know that you are dedicated to writing the best stories, creating the best videos that you can. And for those who could not make it due to the tight turnaround time in putting this together, this video will be made public probably in the next 48 hours as a resource for journalists. So if you feel you need to come back to it or send other people who are interested in this topic to it, you can go to Iranti Media on YouTube, and a version of this session will be up online shortly. With that, thank you everybody, and please, please, please have a wonderful week further.